Alrighty, folks. Welcome back to another video here under our Intellectual Property Protections course. Today, I'm very pleased to be able to actually interview Jason Martinez, who's a CRADA specialist with Sandia National Labs, and he's going to kind of talk about CRADAs and strategic partnership projects. What are the differences? What are the values? Why should you be aware of them? But before we launch into that, Jason, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to our listening, our viewing audience.
Absolutely, sure. So thank you for the opportunity to speak with you and to provide some information for your course. Appreciate you reaching out to Sandia National Laboratories and me in particular. So my name is Jason Martinez, and I'm a CRADA specialist at Sandia National Laboratories. I facilitate all new cooperative research and development agreements for Sandia. I've been in the role currently for about 9 years. I've executed close to 400 CRADAs. I teach at the Federal Laboratory Consortium. I teach at the Technology Transfer Working Group and lead several committees related to CRADA activity. I have lived in New Mexico. I actually went to the University of New Mexico for my MBA, JD, and my undergrad.
Very nice. Always love to be able to get New Mexico people here to talk to our New Mexico audience. So, Jason, CRADAs and strategic partnership projects are kind of let's just call it a mystery to a lot of people that are not within the Federal Lab Consortium or within the FFRDCs or kind of within that very high level of a research ecosystem. So to get us started, what are the differences between a CRADA and a strategic partnership project, and why are those differences important?
So to set the table, Sandia National Laboratories is a government-owned, contractor-operated laboratory within the Department of Energy. And Sandia National Laboratories is owned by the DOE and NSA and is operated by the National Technology and Engineering Solutions of Sandia, or NTES for short. So it's a government-owned, contractor-operated research and development laboratory within the DOE complex. And the reason why that's germane and important is because DOE has a certain set of prescriptive contracts through which Sandia can operate and work with the outside world. Essentially, the only binding mechanism that facilitates collaboration as between Sandia and any non-federal entity is the Cooperative Research and Development Agreement, or CRADA for short. There is another prescriptive contract known as the Strategic Partnership Project, or SPP for short. And so the SPP can come in two different species, really. If there's another federal agency that wants to send funding to Sandia, that's the vast preponderance of funding that comes in from an SPP standpoint. But we can also have a strategic partnership project with a non-federal entity. The difference between those two contracts is at the end of the day, both of those are contracts. Just like you have a mortgage, just like you have a carrier, cell phone carrier, or Netflix, whatever it is you have, all those are contracts. So the CRADA is a contract and the strategic partnership project is a contract. Offer, acceptance, consideration. So within the context of that, the primary difference between those two is a preposition, with or for. If Sandia is going to be working with a non-federal entity, then the cooperative research development comes in because the work should be collaborative and therefore cooperative. If Sandia is going to be working for a non-federal entity, providing some sort of deliverable or service, testing, some samples are tested, and our researchers do tests on that and send the data back. And Sandia is doing the vast preponderance of the work on that. That's going to be the strategic partnership project. Another key element is that the strategic partnership project requires that the non-federal entities send funds to Sandia in order to perform the work. The Cooperative Research and Development Agreement does not necessarily require funds sent from the non-federal entity to Sandia. There could be some sort of exogenous funding source. Maybe there is existing funding at Sandia already. Maybe it's DOE work authorization funds. Maybe there's a laboratory-directed research development project that's already in existence that we can cost against in order to perform the work. Because at the end of the day, Sandia National Laboratories is required to be a full cost recovery laboratory by the DOE. And basically what that means, for all intents and purposes, is that Sandia has to have funding on hand in order to perform the work.
Gotcha. I think that provides a really good foundation for people, particularly, and I think, that summary of, look, it's either, is it for or is it with, is a really great breakdown for people. Now, you kind of hinted towards an answer here, and particularly from the funding level, but it sounds like there's a good number of mechanisms that come into place or fire when a small business, or as you said, a non-federal entity is wanting to work with Sandia or wanting Sandia to work for them. But kind of at the end of the day, why does Sandia, or generally just what's the overall purpose for Sandia to enter into a CRADA or an SPP with a small business?
So there's several purposes at the core of it. When we look at the legislative drivers behind the purpose of it, so the Stevenson-Weidler Act, codified as 15 U.S.C. 3710A. Within that piece of legislation that's been codified, there's a technology transfer mission, and it's been applied by legislation down the road that applies the Stevenson-Weidler Act to the DOE laboratories. So there's a legislative driver behind the mission of Sandia National Laboratories. So Sandia National Laboratories is known for stockpile stewardship, right? So that's the nation's stockpile of nuclear weapons, maintaining those weapons, ensuring reliability. That's the main mission of Sandia National Laboratories. But through that mission, there's a lot of dual-use technologies that arise, dual-use technologies and capabilities that arise. And from that framework, we're able to engage in technology transfer. The intent behind the Stevenson-Weidler Act is that there are capabilities, intellectual property, and technologies from a broad sense that are developed by the national laboratories, and then they are transferred via technology transfer mechanisms to academia, to industries, and to small businesses for the purposes of having a benefit for the U.S. economy, and basically in sending that technology out because the laboratories themselves can't commercialize. And so we look at small businesses and we look at large businesses and even academia, not from a commercialization standpoint with academia, but to augment what Sandia has already done and to take that technology and take it to a higher TRL level in order to do whatever it is that someone wants to do with it. So that's really the mission and the driver behind it from a legislative standpoint. Also within our prime contract, there's still a requirement that we have that technology transfer mission. So it's not just something that Sandia embarks on as an opportunity for board or something like that. It's definitely something that the researchers embrace. And so in my experience in those 9 years of executing CRADAs, what I've seen is that the Sandia researchers really like to work with academia and with small businesses and the outside world. Because a lot of the work they normally work on, they can't talk about with their families or something else. So when they work with a company with a brand name like Procter & Gamble, they're able to say, hey, we understand what it means to develop better razors. Or we look at Goodyear, we understand what it means to have better tires. And those are some of the examples that we've had with CRADAs in the past. And that's where our researchers get excited about that. So there's a lot of drivers behind the excitement that our researchers have in working with industry and academia.
Well, and I think that's an excellent way to just kind of look at that and kind of look at that mission and that value statement, because, here at Arrowhead Center and under NM Surge, we're all about trying to grow that innovation ecosystem, which is exactly what you were talking about there. How do you get these great tools, these great resources, and these great capabilities and capacities into other people's hands so that they can kind of foster their own idea? They can, quote unquote, bake it a little bit more until it's ready for, the outside world and the outside market. So, kind of given that, there's a lot of really great reasons, it sounds like, that someone should be interested in working with Sandia through a CRADA, through, the sponsored partnership project, through just whatever mechanism they can. If they were interested in that, though, what should they know about that process, and kind of what would be their first step?
The first step is making sure that they're having the idea of what someone wants to do, right? So that's really the initiating step. So if there's a technology, there's a push or a pull. Maybe a company has an interesting piece of technology they would like Sandia's help on, or vice versa. Maybe there's some intellectual property or capability that Sandia's already developed, and they would like to have an opportunity to commercialize that in some context. So that's the first, identifying why they would want to reach out, why someone would want to reach out to Sandia in the first place is the first step. Once that has occurred, and it appears that there is some interest in wanting to move forward on some sort of technical project, the next step that's really interesting to take a look at is there has to be mutuality. So the researcher from a company has to align with the research interests of a Sandia technical principal investigator, and vice versa. So that's important, to have mutuality and alignment of technical objectives. And a lot of times these are informal discussions and kind of back of the napkin type discussions that the people have, but it's important to have those discussions in principle to understand the mutuality of technical objectives. Then at that point, if there's mutuality and technical objectives, then really the next step is to determine a cognizable funding source. So I mentioned in a previous question, or an answer in a previous question, that Sandia National Laboratories is required to be full cost recovery. So there has to be a funding source for a Sandia principal investigator to conduct work. So he or she has to be able to cost against that funding source. So if sometimes there's a funding opportunity announcement for small businesses, like the Technology Commercialization Fund, or there is the Trigger program. It's TRGR, I believe it is. And there's a Trigger program that's available here for small business located in New Mexico. So identifying some way that the researchers at Sandia are essentially able to cost against, basically get paid to do the work that they're doing. That's going to be one of the discussions that I have with small businesses often. That's a large step, right? So when we're talking about small businesses or any businesses in this economy, liquidity is tight. And quite frankly, Sandia is not all that cheap from the overhead perspective. And so having those discussions about what it will cost to achieve those mutual objectives will then allow both the company and Sandia to narrow the scope or broaden it based on how much it may cost. And so that's kind of how it goes. And so what I always look at from a contract standpoint, and notice I haven't said anything about contracts at this point because I like the technical work to drive the contractual mechanism, not the other way around. So we don't start with the CRADA and then work towards that. We start with identifying mutuality, identifying funding source, and then I'll look at what those technical goals are, look at what that funding source is, and then I'll determine if a CRADA is the most appropriate, or if it's a strategic partnership project, or if it could be handled just with a non-disclosure agreement, depending on what it is.
And, I think that's an excellent way to look at that. That's something that here at Arrowhead Center, we do a lot of assistance for small businesses that are going after SBIR and STTR opportunities. And that's one of the things that I always tell them is, don't let the opportunity drive what you want to do. These are a seed. These are a way to get to where you want to go. You have to let what you want to do drive the opportunity. And I think that's actually something really great for Sandia to focus on there is, you don't let the CRADA define what we can do. Let's define what we can do together and then find that mechanism, find that opportunity, find that benefit, find that, whatever contractual obligation it has to be. So, we talked a lot about kind of CRADAs, the sponsored partnership projects, why people should be interested, the just myriad of benefits that those bring to the table. If you could leave the audience kind of with one final thought about CRADAs or SPPs, what would that thought be and why?
So it's kind of a binary thought that I have with it. One of them is the benefit of working with Sandia is Sandia researchers have been working on this technologies, capabilities, and developing intellectual property for about 70 years, and it's billions of dollars worth of taxpayer funded of R&D that is accumulated with that. So that there's that benefit that's associated with working in Sandia, because you're dipping into that pool and not having to pay for that research yourself. And so to get to that certain point is something that's a great benefit. So that's something I'd like to leave a lot of folks with. The other one is that working with Sandia, it could be scary, right? So you look at Sandia National Laboratories, it's a large company. It's 13,000 FTEs, 13,000 full-time equivalents. And then you add in the complexity of it's a government-owned contractor or operated laboratory within the DOE complex. So it's not just large. Then you have all the rules and regulations associated with that, but it's not that scary. And so we have executed. Before I came in, we were executing about 17 CRADAs a year. Now we're executing about 40 CRADAs a year or more. And our feedback, we continually work with folks who have reached out to us And we like to incorporate feedback to make the process easier. I'm there to answer questions. The forums have a lot of explanations within them. There's very clear outlined steps, and there's a management of expectations up front so that someone hopefully isn't disappointed at the end. And after 9 years, I've only had one company walk away from CRADA negotiations because of the terms and conditions. Others had walked away because of liquidity or whatever else. So at the end of the day, it's not as scary as it might seem. We're here to help you out with the process, and it's not a distributive type negotiation. So it's not looking like we're trying to get a better deal for Sandia. Like in most contractual negotiations, one party is trying to take advantage of the other party or try to maximize its own advantage as between the other party. Whereas here at Sandia, we're not like that. It's not our mission to do that. We want to transfer the technology and make it as easy as possible for these small businesses to affect that mission.
Well, that's excellent points there. And it really, at the end of the day, kind of sounds like the best piece of advice to give to people and the audience here is just reach out. I mean, it sounds like Sandia has a lot of great capabilities, a lot of great mechanisms, a lot of great vehicles for working together and just figuring out what's going to fit that company best and what's going to fit that business best. Sounds like the best thing is, shoot an email, get in contact with people, just get on the radar and start having those discussions.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, if in doubt, reach out. And so whether to our office or the partnerships office or the CRADA office, or if you happen to know a particular researcher or field, there's folks that you can reach out to. And so ultimately the mission for Sandia is to provide service to its government customers. And so there's an opportunity cost of time, but you have 100% of having no if you never asked. So it's an opportunity to reach out and see if there's the availability, if there's that mutuality, and it's worth a try.
Well, that's a lot of great information for our audience, Jason. Thank you so much for taking time out to, be on this interview, to talk with our audience about, kind of just the benefits of what can Sandia or any other national labs bring to the table for small businesses? What are the different mechanisms for working together, and just why at the end of the day are those mechanisms valuable? I greatly appreciate it, and I'll make sure that people have a way for, if nothing else, at least being able to land on the webpage for your program at Sandia, and just to find out more information and start to make those connections and put out those feelers.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I'll make sure that you have the link to our external website. It explains in more detail what a CRADA is and in more detail what a strategic partnership project is and who to contact and whatnot. So I'll make sure that there's that link. But yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to explain a little bit more during this session here today.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. And for our audience, we hope that this was valuable. We hope that this was interesting and had a lot of really great information for you. And we hope that as you move forward with looking at your intellectual property, your kind of technology portfolio, your patent portfolio, this gives you some better ideas about how to branch out, how to better leverage it, and how to be more strategic in your endeavors. Thank y'all, and we will see y'all in our next interview video.